By the mid-2000s, at the end of a talk like that, I would see a often stony-faced audience, and I would inevitably get the question. The first question would be, why don't Muslims denounce terrorism? Why are Muslim women not allowed to drive? Even though my car might actually have been in the parking lot of that very church, and I had driven there. Why do Muslims hate America? Even though they had heard my biography and about, here I was as a Muslim engaged in this country and with the government and civil society. So suddenly what they were hearing, what I said was being filtered through preconceived frames. They already felt that they knew what Islam was, they knew what Muslims were, and so anything that I said was being filtered through that and really being filtered out for the most part. So I realized that it was no longer simply about this face-to-face naive encounter where we shared information. Now, why is that the case? And I don't want to be an amateur psychiatrist or, but we do know, and as Reverend Isaac said, there is information, there is a lot of science behind how we receive information, how we change, how we interpret things. And one thing is clear, and there's many studies to prove it, is that the first time we hear about something novel or new creates a cognitive frame that is like an anchoring effect. And afterwards, that will always determine how we weigh or measure any new information after that. So that means that if the vast majority of Americans have never met a Muslim before, the first place they will encounter Islam probably is on the news. And that will be a terrorist, a violent person, and that was particularly true. So it was interesting because 9/11 didn't really do it. It was the war in Iraq where day after day after day there were images of the war, Americans being killed, bombs, violence. So it was really after that this, I believe, this anchored within the mind of most Americans the image of the Muslim, and the Muslim was a violent person. So that's there, and once it's there, it will always be with you, and it needs to be worked against. Now, for those, what happens now, even worse since then, is that our beloved, internet that can be such a source of information has emerged as a vast source of disinformation when it comes to Muslims and Islam. It's very, very distressing to do a Google search on Islam and Muslims. In my Muslim women's spirituality class, I asked them to do a Google search, Muslim women, and on images, Google images, and you will just see picture after picture after picture of, a woman, black, completely covered. Sometimes, like her face cover will be like bars, prison bars over her face, and it seems to be very popular. So even someone who hears the news and might be interested, I wonder what it is about Muslims, will be mostly disinformed by searching the internet. And then, of course, there are those who are ideologically opposed to Muslims and Islam, either through a particular political ideology or a xenophobic ideology that they've attached, and they associate Muslims with non-whites, right? There's a racialization of Islam. One time, one of my landlords who was responding to the fact that we were having hate crimes committed against us by one of the neighbors in our apartment complex when I was a student, looked at me and said, well, you know, it might not be religious. Sometimes, believe it or not, people just might not like you because of the color of your skin. And I said, oh, yeah, I guess there are those who don't like white people. So again, you know, she saw me as a person of color because of my hijab. I thought that was quite interesting. So, you know, so the result is that many people are terrified of Muslims, and that is their instinct. You know, they've been made terrified by Muslims, and I see it. You know, in Southwest Airlines, it used to be that you lined up and you went to the first seat that you found. It was kind of first come, first serve. I'm actually a very good person to sit beside on an airplane because I'm not very big. So you can kind of like move into my space. But it would be remarkable to me how often I would be the one person left with an empty seat beside me. That was good for me, but you know, it was quite amazing. But it made me, you know, it just made me really sad. It made me sad for me. You know, it's not nice to feel that people are afraid of you. And it made me sad for them as well. Last week, I had, you know, when we talk about information, you know, what is enough to prove to someone that you're a good person? Like, how much do you have to do to prove that you're a good person? You know, first of all, we shouldn't be guilty until proven innocent. That seems to be what it is. But even that, the degree of misinformation, the degree to which people are so convinced they understand that Islam requires Muslims to hate Christians, to hate America, to be, you know, against every value in this country is so pervasive that last week I saw on CNN one of my former students being interviewed in response to Carson's remarks. Now, my student just retired from 35 years in the Army Reserve as a lieutenant colonel, Sharita Hussein. She was one of my students in the Islamic chaplaincy program. She served 35 years in the U.S. military, retired as a lieutenant colonel, and when she was being interviewed, she was forced to explain why, you know, to answer the question about Sharia law, and can you really say that a Muslim can be faithful to the United States when they still follow a religious law? And the kind of questions that were being asked her, and she was being forced into this position, it was amazing to me that even her whole service, her life of service, was not enough. The fact that she'd served all of these years, and of course, clearly had been scrutinized throughout all of these years at multiple levels, about her loyalty, her allegiance, her patriotism. None of that was enough. And it really struck me what a serious problem we're dealing with. I wish I didn't have to talk about this, but I have to talk about this now because we've got to be realistic. Reverend Isaac talked about tactics, and this afternoon we're going to have another keynote where tactics is actually in the title. We have to be realistic about what's happening, the dynamics of what's happening. And one of the things that we hear again and again, and I can't mention who it is, but there's someone in a very high government position in a certain country who once said to me, well, how do we really know, how can we really trust what you're saying when, I'm sorry to say it, but we know that Muslims are required to engage in subterfuge, taqiyya, subterfuge, to deceive, to be deceitful about what their faith really teaches. And this is something that Carson referred to. So how is there all of this, now you have all these people who know nothing about Islam and Muslims who are sure that they have a clear understanding of Islamic theological ethics, and that is that Muslims are required to lie about their faith. So we have to understand that, if you are convinced that the person you're engaging with, whether they seem like a decent person, they seem like a nice neighbor, they seem like a good citizen, served for 35 years in the U.S. military, but can you really trust them? Because underneath, we know that their loyalties lie somewhere else, and they are religiously obligated to lie about this. You will never get anywhere. We will never get anywhere, because right at the beginning, there's a wall. This person can't be believed. So I would, first of all, like us to remember how many times that theme has been part of alienating people even within this country. Whether you could really trust a Catholic to be loyal to the United States and not to the Pope. And now we see, this is what gives me hope, now we see the beautiful reception that's being given to the head of the Catholic Church in this country. So that should give us hope and optimism that these things can change. But how often people have been considered to be, at their core, essentially disloyal to this country because they have another faith or cultural origin or ethnicity. So let me just say something about this so-called Islamic doctrine, which is not a doctrine at all. It's not a pillar of Islam, it's not a key of Islam, and it does not say that Muslims are required to conceal their faith or be deceitful or any of this. There's a verse of the Quran that says, anyone who denies God after having attained faith, and this, to be sure, does not apply to one who does it under duress while his heart remains true to faith. The one who denies God after being faithful will be subject to God's judgment. But this does not apply to the one who has true faith but renounces it under duress. This goes back to the earliest period in Islam when there was terrible persecution of the first believers. And in particular, this was revealed with respect to a young man who was tortured for being a Muslim, along with his parents. And his parents were both killed, tortured to death under his eyes. His mother was sexually violated. The torture included a sexual violation of his mother. And in that context, Ammar ibn Yasir said, okay, I renounce God. I renounce God. And he came to the Prophet Muhammad crying and feeling that he had done a terrible, terrible thing. And the Prophet Muhammad told him, if they come back to you and ask you to say something, say the same thing. Save your life. Because in this case, it was unbearable to him. It was so traumatic. And so this verse of the Quran was revealed as a comfort to those who were persecuted and under that torture could not hold up and testify to their faith.